Welcome to Nicholas Galaxy Brain. My name is Matthew. Each week, I sit down with some of the brightest people named Nicholas building in Web3 to talk about what they're working on right now. In today's episode, I sit down with Nicholas with 4 leading ends.
Welcome back to another episode of the Juicecast. Today we'll be talking with Nicholas. Nicholas is a longtime JuiceboxDAO contributor, an active developer, and host of Web3 Galaxy Brain, a casual weekly Twitter Space series where he interviews builders about their projects and interests.
In this episode, we dive into Nicholas's background and what it is about social networks that makes him tick. We discuss the evolution of Juicebox from the early days until now, as well as his recent work on Juicebox Metadata.
We also touch on his recent hackathon project at ETH Waterloo, Piggybank 6551 NFT.
So before we get into this episode of the Juicecast, the Bincast. Sorry for the weird stack of Easter egg colored bins behind us. Our dining room light fixture suddenly fell from the ceiling one night and we needed something to hold it up. So that's why they're still there. It still hasn't been fixed, so.
Also want to give a quick shout out to the team at PrtyDAO for shipping the new project pages on Juicebox.money, which are now live. They feature a fresh new layout, new checkout experience, and the ability to bookmark projects and subscribe for email updates. Stay tuned for even more features like the ability to add project updates and images and markdown formatting in project descriptions.
We hope you enjoy this week's episode.
All right. Welcome, Nicholas. Thank you so much for joining us on the Juicecast today. For anyone listening that doesn't already know, Nicholas was the OG host of the Juicecast for episodes 1 through 4. So it's very fun to have you on as a guest now on the Juicecast. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Before we get into your background and like a little bit of the Nicholas origin story, I was wondering if you could talk about the name Nicholas with 4 N's. Like, were there other names involved, or like, was it just like Nicholas with other N's were taken? Did you have other pseudonyms in the hopper?
Yeah, I had another name. In college, or maybe just before college, I decided I preferred Nicholas to Nick, and my prior name had Nick in it. So I needed to change, and I thought if you click N a bunch of times, you'll eventually find me. So this way you don't have to remember too much. I just say like mash the N key and you can find my name. So it's kind of a Twitter SEO hack.
All right, well, let's dive into the Nicholas origin story. So I remember following you back on Twitter. You had maybe 1,500, 2,000 followers. And at the time, I don't even think I knew what Ethereum was. So I'm curious to know how your interest in crypto first began and sort of what you were up to around that time.
Yeah, totally. So before I got into crypto seriously, I guess I bought some ETH in, I think 2017 was the first time on Coinbase. I bought some ETH, something like that, just a few $100s. And I didn't really pay much attention. I knew that ETH was the most interesting blockchain to me, but I didn't know much more than that. And I had this impression that crypto was very mathematical. This is before DeFi even really existed. So, Ethereum was very cryptography based. Little did I know there were even people doing NFTs, in various forms back then. But I then heard about NFTs, and a friend convinced me that they were it was like CryptoKitties era. And a friend convinced me that they were just like IPFS. I didn't even know what IPFS was, but they were CIDs on the blockchain. And so it wasn't even real, and it was just like a dumb certificate, and it's not interesting. So I just never looked into it because this friend convinced me that they weren't. And then in 2020, I finished working. I was at the same time working on a master's degree at kind of the intersection of technology, like computer science, and a little bit of electronics and fine art. And I was doing this independent research project into the supply chain and the fashion of creating new networks, be they social networks or hardware, software, services, kinds of things. And at the same time, I was working in a community center, in a fab lab, basically like a maker space with a laser cutter, 3D printer, that kind of thing, embroidery machine, and some inspiring people helping anybody learn how to use those tools. So really a community center based fab lab, not a exclusive one in a university or something like that. And simultaneously doing that research. I finished the grad degree eventually in the summer. And I just at that time, it was really the beginning of the NFT bull market picking up. And was right around the time Beeple sold for 69 million. I think I had started paying attention maybe a month or two before that during the summer. And I very quickly was like reconsidered NFTs. I remember there were a bunch of threads. At the time, Metakovan was a bigger force in the ecosystem, and some of their Twitter activity kind of woke me up, as well as G Money's original thread about why I bought this 140 ETH JPEG, and learning about the culture of using PFPs in a Discord as a reason why you might value an NFT, even if its metadata were off-chain, really kind of woke me up to some of the potential. And it seemed really compatible with like the creator economy for creators on other platforms where they're restricted in what they can say or what they can sell, being able to like augment their offering with this extra thing that maybe starts small but could potentially get bigger. It just seemed to me to make a lot of sense that influencers and other kinds of creators would naturally want to layer this thing in, which isn't subtractive of anything they're doing, but instead just adds a new revenue stream for pretty low cost. It seemed like it would happen. And I guess that still hasn't totally happened, but those are some of the things that made me pay more attention in summer and fall 2020.
And then from there, like from NFTs, how did you get involved in like the DAO landscape?
Yeah, the DAO landscape. So I had this Twitter account for, many years. I even had an older account covering similar subjects before I forget why I switched, but I've been on Twitter for a long time. And I talked a lot about like social networks and kind of this art practice of whatever's at the intersection of influence and technology companies and refining a vision and Bell Labs and Ted Nelson, all these kinds of subjects. And I discovered that I had already had a following that had experience in the crypto industry. Some folks who had been at Coinbase, who would go on to do Zora, and other people from like Dapper Labs, it turned out, were already following me. So I just started talking more and more about crypto and kind of fell directly into like, oh, actually, I know a lot of people here. So that's kind of how my Twitter account got traction originally. And I just spent too much time on Twitter and was talking about issues that were related to building crypto organizations. And then I befriended Anish Agnihotri, who was the original author of PrtyBid, the MVP. He wrote in response to a tweet from Denis Nazarov from Mirror. I was friendly with him, and PrtyBid was used to win some foundation auction or something, and then turned into more of a DAO that hired a team that Anish was originally on, but eventually left to do other projects, and a more permanent team formed at PrtyDAO. And then they eventually raised venture capital and stuff. So Anish gave me a few tokens from Party, 10 Party tokens, I think it was, in order to join the Discord because I expressed some interest in it, which was super generous of him. And then from that experience, I spent some time in their Discord. I ended up being contacted sometime later by this character, El DeFi Jesus, who was a part of a group of people who were raising funds on Rinkeby to bid on Rinkeby nouns, which are like testnet versions of the nouns contract before it went to mainnet. And he got in touch with me because I was in PrtyBid and he had seen my Twitter account and asked if I could help to make PrtyBid compatible with the nouns contracts so that they could collectively bid on mainnet when nouns went to mainnet. And it turned out it wasn't possible. The nouns contract was closed source until the launch on mainnet. So it wouldn't have been possible to write the adapter contracts that PrtyBid would have needed to interface with the auction. So he went off and then came back to me much later saying, we have a multi-sig where if you want to pitch into it. I decided not to participate, and then the nouns auction happened. The first one was won by a private party, and the second one, SharkDAO had formed, which was the same group of people who had found Juicebox and were using Juicebox to fundraise to win a noun, and they ultimately did win noun number 2. So I was paying attention to the nouns auctions in those early days, and they were on Twitter Spaces, and I sort of learned that it was SharkDAO was the same thing as this guy who had contacted me previously. I ended up joining the SharkDAO Discord and listening in just after they had won, as Django and some other people who were helping out with SharkDAO in the early days were adjusting the issuance rate of the Shark token for donations because they had now, owned a noun and had won an auction. So I kind of got a little exposure to the Juicebox mechanism right away in that first call. And then I spent a lot of time actually working at SharkDAO. And then I sort of started to pay attention more to Juicebox, which was more closely aligned to what my interest had been before, which is like infrastructure for enabling people to do new things, self-organize, experiment with alternate forms of organization of groups of people and assets. So yeah, that's how I found Juicebox.
You've been involved in like the Juicebox ecosystem for like so long. I'm curious to know like what your experience has been like in seeing the way the protocol has grown from like SharkDAO days to like where it is now.
Yeah, when I joined, there were just like a handful of people hanging around. I recall Django, Perry, Zug, Sage, Mios, Zom, Exekias might have been there at the time. Also, there might have been others who I'm forgetting. There were even some people who were there before me who had left already. There was one guy, I can't remember, but he sort of tuned out even before I got involved in July 21, I guess it was. So it was a very small room of people. Everything was informal. There was no formal governance. There was just people chatting in Discord and kind of doing even informal polls, not even like actual polls in Discord to decide what to do. It was very much like who's in the room, and it wasn't a contentious governance environment. There was no formal governance at all. So I was involved early on in kind of helping to organize meetings a little bit. And I remember working with Zug in those early days a lot on trying to keep the Discord organized and develop some process around governance so that it isn't too arbitrary or people don't feel like there's an unequal distribution of power. It's trying to make some formal rules. So it evolved very organically and everybody kind of pitched in. There lots of different characters that showed up and went their own way. And one thing that's always remained consistent is that it's always been very open to people kind of coming and helping or going off and doing their own thing. And what's evolved? I mean, so much. Everything has evolved. The protocol has been rewritten substantially one time and deployed in various subversions multiple times. Also cultural development, huge number of contributors received grants over the time since then and did all kinds of different projects in different media. So many different things have happened and the doors have kind of been opened in terms of the protocol. I'd say that's one thing that's even more, the branching paths have increased since those days because the protocol in its current iteration allows for much more extensibility than that original one did. So not only does it address things like, I remember Shark wanted to pause issuance. It wasn't something you could do in the original version. So Django came up with some scheme for still issuing tokens, but promising to burn them and things like this. And nowadays the protocol supports that and so much more. So yeah, it's changed in many ways.
Have you enjoyed your time as a DAO contributor? Like, is this a type of, I don't know if we can call it a workplace, but is this, like an environment that you like working in? I'm just curious broadly, like Absolutely. Your experiences as a full-time contributor over the years.
Yeah, I mean, JuiceboxDAO has been one of the most amazing places to work. I think there's been many other things that have happened and people have been excited about during that time, but I feel the good energy of the contributors, of course, it's not perfect and there's always issues, but I think people have generally good intentions towards one another. And even when there's conflict, I think there is an underlying, respect for each other and people are pretty humble overall. Everyone's got a wacky personality, of course. It's like the Wild West, but yeah. I think as a place to be, and also, frankly, I mean, as supportive of people's desire to grow. There's so much. There's so many great things about it.
Why don't we dive into the Juicebox metadata contracts? Like maybe we can start with Token Resolver. Like, do you want to tell us a bit about that contract that you authored along with a few folks from the contract crew that helped out and what it does?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
then we can get into Juicebox Cards after that.
To begin, Juicebox protocol, every Juicebox project is represented by an NFT. The owner of these NFTs are the accounts that control their parameters and can decide the issuance rate and all, how much is going to be spent, et cetera. So the fact that Juicebox uses NFTs as the ownership mechanism is really great because it means it's compatible with lots of different protocols. So you can have a project owned by a MetaMask wallet or by a Gnosis safe or by a on-chain governance contract or even things that are designed in the future because whoever owns the NFT can control the project. When I started this project, they had no metadata, which is to say no image or text or categories in the OpenSea page or other ways of viewing NFTs. And the affordance had been created. Django and the contract crew included in the protocol, in this NFT contract, JB projects that is the home to all these NFTs, the ability to set a metadata resolver, which is to say another contract that the project's contract will ask, what's the metadata for this NFT? Anytime anybody asks it for the metadata. So I decided it would be interesting to work on this problem and to create a contract that would represent some of the values of Juicebox and also populate this empty metadata field. So the first thing that I thought to do was to create on-chain metadata, which essentially means a contract that would go and grab statistics about the projects and generate an SVG, an image, based on those data from the protocol directly live on chain without any kind of off-chain dependency. And this was important to me because I think it sort of emphasizes and makes visual and tangible the fact that Juicebox is a set of immutable contracts that really honor the sovereignty of the individual to participate, to read everything, to do their due diligence without requiring any kind of secret knowledge or access to knowledge that's off-chain. Everything is really just on the blockchain. So representing that fact through the visual of the SVG, I thought would be interesting. And I also thought it would be interesting to let the person customize or change their metadata if they prefer to have their project have their own metadata instead of the one that's prescribed by default by the DAO. Juicebox has this principle of allowing people to choose if they want to upgrade their project, if an upgrade is made available by the DAO or by some other party who's written the code. And updates and changes are never forced on the DAO. There's really only a small handful of administrative functions that the DAO has access to. For example, the DAO can set the fee between 0 and 5%, but no higher than that. And another one is the ability to set this token resolver metadata contract. So I decided to do this on-chain SVG contract, and that would become what's called the default token resolver now. And the default token resolver goes and fetches this data and creates a little card for you for every project that shows the project's name, if it has a handle set, as well as its balance, how many tokens have been issued, what address owns the project, etc. And this is all drawn from the chain in real time. Doesn't require any IPFS or Arweave or HTTP calls. It's entirely on-chain. So that's the default resolver. And as a little Easter egg, I allow people also to change the theme colors of their project so they can more suit the attitude of their project. Just a fun little customization. And then sitting in front of that contract, over the course of developing it, I realized rather than enforcing that everybody have the same one, it would be advantageous and more of the spirit of Juicebox to let people set their own. And so the token resolver contract that's set on the Juicebox projects is actually a registry. And it allows any project to set their own metadata contract. And if they haven't set anything, then it will by default serve the one that I just described. So every project on Juicebox that's up to date, at least, has access to this generated on-chain metadata. And if they choose, they can change the colors or change the contract altogether. I've also written another one that allows anybody to set a IPFS or HTTPS as the source of their metadata. So if you want to do off-chain metadata, you can also, it's also compatible with that. And that's just like another registry for the static metadata. So if you wanted to have your own page somewhere hosting metadata that could even do interesting things, whatever you want, served from HTTPS or IPFS or any other string, as long as it returns JSON, then OpenSea and everybody else will be able to read it. So that's the token resolver set of contracts.
Awesome. Thank you. And so built on top of the work that you did for Token Resolver is Juicebox Cards, which, I mean, maybe it's probably best if you tell us about it rather than me describing it. But you've recently built the front end at juicebox.cards, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, like what does this do and how does that build on the work that you did with the Token Resolver?
Yeah, so Juicebox Cards is sort of a next project that follows quickly after this token resolver work. And basically the thinking was, it's cool that projects now have metadata and they can even customize it, make it whatever they want. But it's pretty rare that people actually go to the Juicebox project on OpenSea or whatever their favorite NFT viewer is. And people aren't really trading these or selling them because they represent ownership of the projects. So they don't move that often, and people don't see the collection pages. So I thought, we put all this work into building this on-chain metadata, and maybe people will even make their own metadata contracts for their projects. I know Dr. Gorilla has already done so. Then why not allow people to collect these things? So I created an 1155 open edition contract called juicebox.cards, which is also the website where you can mint them. And juicebox.cards lets you collect a card, which is an NFT open edition with the same metadata as the project itself. So everybody who's like an enthusiast of the project can collect one of these cards. And if the project ever changes its metadata or it just naturally updates as a function of having more ETH in the treasury or what have you, it'll immediately be reflected in the card in everybody's wallet. So it acts kind of like a programmable billboard where true fans of the projects can keep them in their wallet, check out the project, maybe as a way to even see the treasury growth or expenditures, how much they're planning to distribute. or what the total token supply is. And then it can also update if the project ever decides to customize their metadata. So that's Juicebox Cards. It's really an open edition built on top of the same technology as the token resolver for Juicebox projects.
Nice. And you also, you made like almost like a starter repo for someone if they want to do their own project metadata for like their own Juicebox project, right?
Yeah, there's a bunch of other contracts. There's the Juice token resolver template, I believe it is. We'll put the links. But there's a version that's really convenient if you want to make your own token resolver. It imports all the Juicebox stuff already and gives you a basic contract as well as a basic test that you can run in Forge that will render the SVG just so you can see it really easily. And then there's another version that's just straight SVG. So if you want to just do your own SVG contract, it's a good starting point for very quickly being able to just download this repo, open VS Code or whatever your code editor is, and just run a test and see immediately the SVG from Solidity right in your browser. And yeah, as I mentioned, there's also like a couple example, more full contracts like the default resolver and the static metadata one, which could also be useful for people. I know some version of this was used by DeFifa to customize their 721 delegate on their project. So already it's being used and picked up by some people in the ecosystem.
I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about what your interest is in NFTs with on-chain metadata, because it seems like a significant interest of yours, whether that's with Juicebox Cards or projects like Terraforms where like you're a large holder. Like I'm wondering what it is about the on-chain metadata, like being able to either change it yourself or allowing other people to change it, that you're drawn to, like why you think it's important, either from like a technical perspective or a cultural one.
Yeah, I think there's lots of different kinds of interesting NFTs. And one of the interesting kinds is the kind that engages most directly with what the blockchain offers as a medium. And it's not clear to me if, the future people will care more or less about things being truly on-chain. But there is something interesting about being really native to this new technology that's potentially permanent in some sense, censorship resistant, potentially for the most part, and also not dependent on a credit card and a company attached to some Amazon instance somewhere. So I think there is something interesting about like blockchain art, and on-chain NFTs are maybe one of the most blockchain art focused types of NFT. So I just think it's cool. I think Ethereum is kind of like a computer from the 70s, this kind of gas optimization, compression, really focusing on only putting the necessary data on chain. There's like this interesting niche where some people are interested in the compression and the optimization, but want to put more than other people think is necessary on chain. Some people think, you should just be putting proofs and Merkle roots and things like that. And really, you shouldn't burden the chain with anything more than that. It's not an efficient way to do it. But there's other people who feel that IPFS is not a solid enough place to locate the artwork of a piece of art. So I just think on-chain art is an interesting dimension of this. I think probably blockchain art is the most interesting piece, or even cryptographic art, rather than just like NFTs, which is these days usually means 721 token URI, maybe 1155 to an extent, but instead just like creating some social happening that people actually care about. And it being on chain is particularly cool. You get all these advantages of censorship resistance, etc., but also tap into a whole different network of people with a native sense of finance and a global audience. I just think it's like an interesting area to be thinking about, but no guarantees that it's the most popular type of NFT over time.
Yeah, I'm curious because like I've known that you have been interested in math castles and that community for quite some time, and you've been pretty active. Like on the flip side of that type of on-chain art is also like the PFP collections that are more, I guess, almost like Web2 adjacent, in that they're trying to engage more in like a brand building exercise, or they're trying to create like an IP empire, like a la Disney or whatever else. In like the last week or two, we've seen a lot of those floor prices kind of get destroyed. I don't know. Have you been thinking about this recently as someone who's pretty heavily involved in the NFT scene, like whether the promises of a lot of these projects have fallen through, or is this like not something you're paying attention to?
Yeah, I think a lot of these brands grew too fast, like much bigger valuation than the actual audience size, without a clear argument about why their success amongst crypto speculators would lead to success outside of that market. And the market's pretty small, and it's gotten smaller since they were very successful. So I don't pay too much attention, honestly. I don't hold very many of those collections, maybe any. one thing that's interesting about the on-chain stuff relative to the PFP stuff is that I think it's interesting to cultivate a real actual following that really cares about the thing rather than community. I mean, obviously, if the community cares about it primarily for the price, if the price falters, they start to get angry and maybe the thing is actually hollow. At the same time, I don't think it's required that collections be maximally like blockchain art, and I think the doing partnerships with other organizations can make sense, and achieving some kind of notoriety can propel something to being a next level kind of brand. I think of when you ask the question, my interview on Web3 Galaxy Brain with David Horvath, who has built some like cartoon characters that have been very successful, kind of in the Hello Kitty vein, and I think he would say. Well, actually, he'd have so many things to say. He would say you should start with a children's book because it'll retain the most IP. But I guess NFTs offer another direction for that. But it's difficult to take something that doesn't have a genuine audience to market, especially if they're going to go from something like a tiny NFT collector base to Walmart or some other big box retailer or Amazon even. The same skills for generating hype in the crypto scene may not directly apply to a broader audience that doesn't know about that yet. I think one thing that's very interesting in this direction is the Reddit PFPs that people don't talk about enough, where they've got millions and millions of Redditors who should be people who despise crypto and NFTs, all have like implicit Polygon wallets on their phones. And my sense is that maybe that project has slowed down, or you don't hear as much about them doing anything with that. But it would be interesting if they did something with that. I mean, those will sooner or later be ZK wallets built into the Reddit app. And now Reddit is forcing everyone to use Reddit app instead of other apps. It's a potential sleeping giant. My suspicion is that this may get lost in the shuffle of the organizational internal stuff rather than really exploited to its maximum. But if they were open to actually having that wallet expose, for instance, a Reddit-owned marketplace where they took a fee on all NFTs on Polygon that are purchased through the Reddit app, I would happily make an NFT collection that speaks to the audience of Reddit users who could even be paying in USD with a credit card and suddenly collecting a second collection in addition to their PFPs. But I don't understand from an anthropological perspective exactly how they have managed to get the Polygon NFTs through the door at Reddit with the subs. And I don't know if maybe the context now would make it harder for them to introduce new things because they've created the management has created such a hostile relationship with the mods. Maybe there will be more skepticism of productization of crypto in the app. But it would be a perfect storm. I mean, gosh, it's a lot of people with a soon-to-be ZK, I don't know, account abstraction wallet or whatever it is that Reddit, I guess, custodial wallet. So yeah, cool stuff. And I don't think PFPs are dead or anything like that. And obviously, I don't think NFTs are dead. It's kind of weird to see people say things like that.
You've mentioned a few times throughout the recording your interest in social networks. I'd like to know, what it is about social networks that interests you, but also how that has changed since your involvement in blockchain has changed that. I'm just curious to know in general, what it is that you're drawn to about it.
I guess when I was younger, I thought maybe I would study something like cognitive science or urban design, or what's upstream of specific creative gestures is sort of the context in which they percolate, and the difference between having a city or not having a city, or living in one area versus living in another, are kind of translated into a medium where a small group of individuals can have much greater impact. It would be pretty difficult for us to start a city, but basically if we all hit the books, we could start a social network soon. So the leverage of small groups of people, that ubiquitous internet and software and pretty convenient and affordable devices has given us is an incredible opportunity. And I've always perceived of it as a brief window while the internet is truly global, which started to fall apart, almost immediately. But it's been the case that we've had sort of limited access to China or Iran or North Korea and other places. But overall, the internet remains pretty much global. And certainly if you run the productized form, if you run the equivalent of Facebook, if you run your own website, you can still be accessed. It is still possible. You might not be able to say whatever you want on Facebook anymore or Instagram or shown to people even. But if you can get them your link, people can still access your website. So I've always felt that there's an incredible opportunity to, have some impact or have some taste or creative expression related to how people relate to one another, of which I am a subject also. It's not a role outside of the system, but very much we find ourselves in the system, and our parents didn't have any sage advice for us. In fact, they're if anything, more subject to the whims of the algorithm in terms of informing their attitude or feelings or what they think about. So I've always felt that that's like an interesting medium for creativity. I don't really feel like very many people have said very much creative about it. I have come to wonder if is the UX designer telling the users what to do, or are the users like chimpanzee behavioral psychology telling the UX designer what to do? Like, it's interesting to watch Musk muck around because he is acting as an individual making decisions, which is not usually how these things go. Like ultimately, Facebook, at least especially, has, which is very dominant in communications media, has taken a like path of least resistance in terms of human behavioral psychology. And there are great talks by people. What is it? Donald Brown. Alan Kay talks about this anthropologist who has like an appendix in one of his books that's just like human universals, like things that all humans all over experience. And Alan Kay's cynical rib at that is like, just pick one of these things if you just want to make money. Just like make software that satisfies one of these things, which 30 years later has been presented to us as like sage advice about what kind of YC startup to start. But the point is that those are not, in a way, they're not even creative because they have the opportunity, like you need to hook into some kind of sugar rush, but ideally your goal is something more than just serving the pleasure neuron or whatever. So I don't know how crypto has changed that feeling. Definitely NFT communities felt like mini social networks, mini tribes with a lot of potential, but I didn't really believe this like Moonbirds idea that you would just turn that into a software product company. It's not as obvious to me that you go from one to the other. I think maybe, the political dimension of some other collections actually seems more right for the medium. Like it's creating a cultural unit, and then it's not about building the literal infrastructure, but instead about propagating whatever that idea is. So I think we haven't seen the end of it at all. I mean, as for social networks and crypto, I think one thing I'm observing a lot lately is kind of the power of building the tribe rather than having the right technology, and that the tribe it's not exclusively important, but it's probably more important on the whole than having the right technology. And it's interesting to look at Ethereum under that lens because it's kind of both, but at the same time, like, I don't know, the proof of work chain is not what we're going to stick with. So in a way, like changing out the engine while the plane is flying is much easier than getting a plane to fly, or much easier. I don't know. It's relatively easier once there is some ideally not toxic core to attract more people to continue working on it and building it into something, rather than like booting up. Such a thing is pretty difficult. And two examples of that I think are interesting are Polygon and Zora, where both have multiple times changed what the product is, what the tech stack is, probably have very hairy tech debt related to all of that. Like really, I imagine quite painful tech debt about all that stuff, having to service the old stuff and make a way to have it transition without rugging anybody, etc. But both of them have created tribes that, or maybe tribe is not the right word, but passionate communities that are there and present for switching to some new tech substrate underneath. So I think those are very interesting lessons, and crypto definitely seems to reward people more so than Web 2 for experimenting, for trying things, for having something that's a little bit of a rough draft out there. And I think the future is bright.
I'm just curious, how many, like speaking of social networks, how many hours would you say you spend a day on crypto Twitter?
I don't know. Several. It's kind of just where I go. It's like the other thing I go to look at. I look at that. Some people look at Discord. Some people refresh Reddit. Some people look at Instagram. I just go to Twitter. So yeah, several. It's probably several. Not every day. Some days I don't spend any time on Twitter. I kind of wish it was Discord a little bit more. I feel like the private chats is really where more of the alpha is.
Like, how would you, if you had to describe the culture of crypto Twitter, at least as you understand it, like if you had to describe that to your grandmother or to your mom or something, like how would you describe this entity that exists right now? Because I don't know, I'm not even sure quite what word I would use, but I find it a very unique grouping of insane people on the internet. So I'm just curious how you would describe it to someone else.
I don't know. It's just kind of the Twitter that I see. It's just the people I see on Twitter. So I don't know how. I think it's kind of like a subreddit in terms of the same characters turning up. It's a little more like fuzzy at the edges for what your experience is and where it intersects with other people. There's less of a coherent experience, but I really just focus on following builders, people who actually get something done. And I try not to pay too much attention to people who are too involved in the financial aspect. So I think I miss some of the like trader memes for this reason, as hilarious as those can be. how would I explain it to someone who doesn't really know what it is? Web3 crypto seems to me to really attract kind of personalities on the edge. So there's a lot of people who are very volatile in their emotional state and get very worked up and maybe say things that they maybe regret or don't feel for a long period of time. What's cool is that I think because crypto is has financial primitives that lend themselves to financialization very easily, it's able to persist in this way where I guess there are Web2 things where there's no, like Arena exists and probably has a similar population size to crypto Twitter, and it doesn't have a financial motive, but it is nice that crypto gets to like perpetuate. People are always kind of willing to like throw some cash around, and it allows new projects to form that have their own aesthetics and their own values. So I really like that about it. Also, I think one thing that's super underrated about crypto Twitter is that everybody's DMs are open. Everybody's DMs are still open. I've been saying since 2020, like, I can't believe how many people have their DMs open and how you can just get in touch with anyone. And most people are down to just talk to you, like whoever you are, with some random Twitter profile. I think that is like an exceptional opportunity that people don't really appreciate, and that people spend much too much time worried about the specific projects that exist at any one time and not enough time focused on the people who are going to be the people who are here tomorrow and are that much more experienced. So I think people are too concerned with like the specifics of the projects at a given moment. Probably the people who create the most successful NFT projects, for example, will have created very, very bad NFT projects in the last cycle and will have learned something from it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Even like coming into the space from like a fine art background, like in the traditional art world, like it's such a closed circle. Like there's so many barriers to accessing people, but then like in crypto, like I was able to connect with people I would arguably otherwise never have the ability to, just because of the openness and the welcomingness of like CT environment. So yeah. I wanted to go back to Juicebox Cards for a minute because you recently gave a talk at ETH Waterloo about it. I was wondering if you could talk about like the Juicebox metadata contracts. Like, what did you focus on in that talk? And then also you were like
totally.
finalist for your project PiggyBank 6551.
Yeah, totally. I gave a talk at ETH Waterloo about this Juicebox metadata, both the token resolver, the default resolver, and also the Juicebox Cards version. And I just gave a kind of like a little tech talk about some things I learned along the way building on-chain metadata contracts and some tips for how other people might benefit from those lessons. There's a room, about 25, 30 people, something in the room. And I think a lot of people new to NFTs. ETH Waterloo had a really high percentage of attendees who were from the universities, like not old hands in crypto. So it was a good mix of people who maybe never heard of on-chain metadata. And I just wanted to share some of that information kind of to cap the V1 of the project and maybe see if anybody else wants to work on it. And then in the hackathon, so I did a speech, and then I also did a hackathon project. I kind of decided last minute that I had this idea for a long time, and the ERC-6551 team from Vancouver, Future Primitive, was there. And 6551 is like this EIP that it basically uses create to and a registry pattern to create one or up to infinite wallets for every NFT that exists, every 721 NFT on Ethereum or on every chain, actually, every EVM chain. And basically, it allows you to use an account smart contract wallet that they provide to create addresses for every NFT. And the NFT is the one that controls that smart contract wallet. So I wanted to do for a long time this Piggybank concept. So I forked a simple version of their account contract, and it let me basically create an NFT collection, although it would work with all NFTs, incidentally. But I made a specific NFT collection where you can deposit ETH into an NFT that you mint. It's reflected in an Onchain SVG that shows you how much ETH is contained inside of your NFT. It also changes like the color of the image based on how much. And then in order to access the ETH that's inside the smart contract associated with that NFT, you have to burn the NFT. And when you burn the NFT, it gets sent to its own wallet address, which makes the contract inaccessible, essentially burning the smart contract. Although sending to 000 would do the same, but it's just kind of a 6551 native style of burning. And when that happens, the smart wallet gives the ETH to the person who burned the NFT. So it acts like a piggy bank, mint an NFT, put ETH in it. You have to destroy the piggy bank to get the ETH back out. So I used the opportunity of the hackathon to do a version of that. And based on some of this SVG knowledge I gained during that project, I was able to, about 14, 15 hours, spin up both the forked account contract and also the Onchain SVG, which was pretty cool because it's actually easier for me now to do Onchain SVG than figure out how to do it on a server probably. So yeah, it was a fun project, and it won the Interaction Design Award for the 6551 sponsor prizes. And I was also a finalist at the ETH Global level. So yeah, it was a fun project.
Congrats, Nicholas. Is there anything like coming up for Piggybank? Like, are you going to continue developing it, or like what's the plan for that project?
Yeah, I am taking into account what I learned doing that implementation during the hackathon, and I'm thinking about how I might restructure the project a little bit and launch something similar on mainnet, or who knows, maybe some other chains.
Awesome. Well, before wrapping up, I want to talk a little bit about the podcast, because you are the host, the longtime host of Web3 Galaxy Brain, and also another podcast, Solidity Galaxy Brain. And Briley and I actually edited that podcast for a brief moment in time. And even before then, I edited a couple episodes way back. But you've been recording these weekly Twitter Spaces, usually on a Friday afternoon, and you've got over 50 episodes in total. So you've been just on this relentless content grind. I'm just curious, like, what are your motivations for producing this podcast over such a long period of time, and how you've been able to do that despite a lot of ups and downs sort of in the crypto ecosystem over that, particularly the last year. Like, I'm thinking back to like November 2022 and other moments that have been particularly grim.
Yeah, I just kind of committed to doing the show and haven't really thought about stopping. There's been a couple weeks where like I'm traveling or something and it's difficult, so I'll skip a week. But for the most part, it's a good question how long I've been doing it. It's been over a year. I don't know how long exactly, but it's been quite a while. But I just like to meet people who are building in the ecosystem, like especially EVM, Ethereum focused people. But I'm open to other people. I don't know so much, so it's hard to diligence like what's interesting or not. But I just like talking to people who are working in this space and actually building something. So it's a fun opportunity for me to get to talk to people, and most people say yes to come on the show. So, I'm excited. I think like coming up, I have the founder of Reservoir, which is like a NFT aggregator for making your own marketplaces and other apps. They'd like aggregate all the order book stuff. And next week I've got Montoya from MetaMask, who's the PM of Snaps, which is their like new UI thing. So, it's fun. Like I could maybe DM them and have like a private conversation, but I figure, why not share that conversation, and maybe someone else has some other ideas, and it's useful to people. And it's nice for me just to get an excuse to meet. I've met so many people all across the ecosystem. And actually recently I had one of my first EF contributors, like Ethereum Foundation researcher. So I think it's very cool I'd like to get even more into the deeper protocol stuff over time as I become a little bit more knowledgeable. I think when I started with Solidity Galaxy Brain with the episode about splits, where it was Graham Boy from Mirror, who had, I think, the first splits contract really on mainnet. And then Foundation, Elpizo Choi from Foundation, and a few other people as well. And that was kind of the first episode, and went really well. I was a little bit nervous about the technical stuff. I was less of a Solidity developer then. So I think as I've become more legitimate in my Solidity chops, I think it's interesting to talk more with people who are even deeper in the tech stack and get into it a little bit. It's fun to try to balance like having an interesting technical discussion with people that's very deep, and not creating something boring or uninteresting. So I enjoy hearing about what specialists know about their special thing rather than generalizations. So it's always fun for me to do the show.
Can you tell us where you see yourself heading next on your journey, whether that's like Solidity projects or other things that you're thinking about in the crypto space? Any other news that's coming up for you?
Yeah, totally. So I just finished this Juicebox Cards metadata stuff, taking a little bit of a break from Juicebox over the summer. I want to do an NFT project. And then from there, I have no idea. I have no big plans. I would love to play more with generative AI stuff, not walk away from crypto in any way, but I think that's a very interesting set of tools for for making games, especially things around narrative. I think there's a lot of underexplored territory for making interesting scenarios that are engaging and really fun and interesting and novel kinds of games that use the generative stuff as a primitive in creating the game experience. The other thing is I was thinking about cameras. In my grad degree, I did some experiments with like Raspberry Pis and camera electronics. And I would really like to collaborate with someone who is awesome at electronics to do some physical hardware camera prototypes. I don't really think I have the stamina to make a camera company. I think that's like a whole other thing. But I would like to have some of the ideas that I have had over the years for physical cameras actually made real. And I would love to collaborate with someone. So if anyone listening is awesome at hardware electronics and you want to collaborate on some art projects, click the button.
It's funny. I feel like maybe even Jiggly Jams could potentially help you out there, because he did electrical engineering and was working on some stuff for sure with cameras, at least in some respect, or the sensors in the Honda Civic and similar vehicles for the comma.ai thing that he used to work on. I don't know.
Oh, I didn't know he was
maybe
a
he
comma
could send you in the right direction. I don't know.
I forgot that. Oh, wow. Yeah, I should definitely talk to Jiggly. Yeah.
Yeah. He was the first hardware engineer hire.
Crazy. That's crazy.
Before we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to discuss, or any like closing thoughts that you want to get in there? Any last minute hot takes?
I guess one thing we didn't talk about is Web3 Galaxy Brain, the show that's every Friday afternoon. I sell sponsorships on Juicebox. So if you're interested in sponsoring that show and listening to this and think you'd like to talk to that audience, I'd have to look really at the numbers, but I would say on average an episode is like 100 to 350 listens, something like that, between the live and the recorded version, at least right now. Who knows if in the long run those get more playbacks as time goes on. I have no intention to stop. So if you'd like to sponsor an episode, you can go to the Juicebox page for Web3 Galaxy Brain. You can just search on Juicebox with like a Command K, Control K. And there's sponsorships for a single episode or a few episodes. And they get burned into the MP3. So those are going to be there forever and in the transcripts also. And I do a kind of fun thing where I read the sponsor thing during the recorded intro, but also live in the middle of the show. So you just give me a little piece of text or tell me what you want me to ad lib about. And then sometimes the guests are like, oh yeah, I love that product, or like a little bit of interaction. So that's kind of a fun element to the sponsorships. So if you're interested, listen to the show Fridays, 5 p.m. Eastern on Twitter Spaces, on my handle, Nicholas with 4 leading N's, or the podcast version is web3galaxybrain.com. And you can also find a link to sponsor an episode. I'd love to have you as a sponsor as long as you're not a scammer. So yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Nicholas, for taking the time to sit down with us. It's kind of like a full circle moment, because we like way back listened to the first few episodes of the Juicecast that you hosted. And then for a little while, we were like editing your podcast. And then now you're back as a guest on this podcast that we're now hosting. So it's this funny little, time is a circle. But yeah, thank you so much for hanging out today.
Of course. Thank you for having me, and congratulations for all the great work you've done with Juicecast and the newsletter. Everything you're doing is great. I really like it.
Thank you, Nicholas. Okay, great. Well, we will, see you on the blockchain, as you always like to say in your outros. I'm going to crib that slogan from you.
That's good.
Thanks again.
Thanks for having me. This was fun. See you on the blockchain.
All right. Thanks again, Nicholas.